is Dan O'Connor, and it looks like Buddy will be joining us for at least some of today's lessons. So everybody say hello to Buddy. Hey, Buddy. Good boy. Today I have a lot of great things in store for you. We're going to be talking about coping statements. We're going to be talking about learning names. Those are a couple of basic professional communication strategies that we haven't covered yet, and I wanted to make sure that we covered them before we moved along. Of course, we'll be doing some danger phrases and power phrases. The difficult person this week is the time sucker, so I can't wait to talk about that difficult person. And of course, we have our principle of the week. So with all of that great stuff, let's get started. Let's talk about when emotions run high when we are communicating. As we all know, as professional communicators, there will be times where our emotions start to take over and emotions run high in many professional communication situations, such as dealing with difficult customers, dealing with a horrible boss, dealing with terrible coworkers or insubordinate employees. Many times our emotions run high, and many times we feel like we're either going to cry or we're going to lose our temper or something like that happens. And I believe we covered brain basics, but remember that there are basically two sides of the brain that come into play when we're communicating. See you later, buddy. The left-hand side of the brain, which is our logical side, and the right-hand side of the brain, which is our emotional side. And remember that language, facts and figures, numbers, logic, lives in the left-hand side of the brain. Emotions live in the right-hand side of the brain. Creativity lives in the right-hand side of the brain. Big picture thinking occurs in the right-hand side of the brain. And many times when emotions are running high, what we need to do is take a moment and calm down. Take a moment for ourselves to cope with the situation. And the average person, when emotions are running high and they need to take some time and calm down a little bit, what do you think the average person says to him or herself? For example, if they feel as though they're about to cry and they don't want to cry, what does the average person say to himself or herself? I'm not gonna cry, I'm not gonna cry, I'm not gonna cry. And then what happens? They cry. Or some people have trouble keeping their temper under control. And so when someone starts to push their buttons, they'll say things to themselves like, I'm not gonna let them get to me, I'm not gonna let them get to me, I'm not gonna get angry, and then kapow, they blow up. So what we're going to learn today is a basic strategy to help give our brain the information using the right syntax. You know, the more they research brains, the more they find out about brains, and the more they develop computers, it's interesting how the more we realize how the two of them work in a very similar way. You know, you can only program a computer using certain language patterns, or else nothing will happen, or else the computer will not know what to do with that information. It won't process it. And our brains work in a very similar way where we can't just give our brains information any old way. There's a certain syntax that we must use, a certain language pattern that we must use when we give ourselves information for it to be effective. And coping statements are all about that.
Coping statements will help you keep your cool.
You know, we tend to say to ourselves things such as, I'm not going to let that get to me, I'm not going to get angry. And what happens is, if we were hooked up to one of those brain machines, it has no effect on our brains at all. Instead, remember that coping statements are formulated to have an effect on our brain. And coping statements are made up of two critical components. Component number one, they are in the present. Component number two, they are positively phrased. So let's go over those two components, because number one, they are in the present, is very simple. Normally we will say to ourselves things such as, I'm not going to get angry, I'm not going to let them get to me, I'm not going to cry, and that's all in the future. And so our brain really doesn't know how to process that information, and therefore it does not. And we'll say to ourselves things that are negative, such as, I'm not going to get angry, I'm not going to cry, I'm not a baby, I'm whatever, I'm not going to let them get to me. Instead, what we want to say is what we are right now. So as a very simple template, if you wanted to use this as a simple template to create properly formed coping statements, remember that you can always just use the simple I am phrase and then fill in the blank at the end. For example, instead of I'm not going to cry, I am calm. Instead of I'm not going to let them get to me, I am cool, calm, and collected. And I realize that we can't throw our emotions out the window. I mean, we can't have total control over our emotions. However, we can have some control over our emotions as opposed to the average person who has no control because they have not yet invested in simple strategies that help them do that. So the next time when you start to feel as though you are emotionally becoming out of control or emotionally charged, remember your coping statements. Now, there's a reason, by the way, we have these flashcards, because coping statements, when you need them, are not easy to formulate. Like right after I give a lesson such as this one in a class, I will ask somebody, all right, give me a coping statement to help keep your emotions under control if you feel as though you're about to start crying. And the average person will say, okay, I'm going to be strong. And they will formulate it positively, but in the future. So it might sound very simple in the present and positively framed. However, it's not that easy when you need them, because what happens is at the time you need a coping statement, you're already in the emotional right-hand side of your brain. So you want to practice using and reciting coping statements when you don't need them. That's why we have that flashcard. So you carry it around. This week, I'd like you to focus on coping statements, practicing them, using them, memorizing them, so that when you need them, you can throw them out and they'll be properly phrased in the present and positive. Those are coping statements. Now, the next little trick that I'm going to teach you today is all about remembering names.
Remember names.
Because if you've been to one of my conferences, many people will comment at the end of them or during them on how I remember everybody's names. And they'll say to me, how do you remember everybody's name? And there are a couple different ways to remember people's names. And I know that a lot of people who are watching this video struggle with remembering names. And we find ourselves in situations where we're meeting somebody at a professional event for the second or third time, and we know we've met them before. We know that we have given them, or that they have given us their name, but we can't remember it for the life of us. So what I'd like to do is teach you one very simple strategy, and we'll cover more later, that will help you remember people's names. The next time you see somebody whose name you may have forgotten, don't be afraid to simply walk up to them and say, hi, I don't know if you remember meeting me, but I'm Dan O'Connor. What's your name again? Of course you want to substitute your name for mine, but it's normally okay, and people don't mind when you walk up to them and say, hi, I don't know if you remember meeting me, but I'm so-and-so. What's your name again? They'll give you their name, and then that's over. We don't have to play the old bringing a friend over and say, hey, ask them what their name is in front of me so that I can pretend like I remember it. Normally, we don't need to do that. But to avoid that whole situation, the strategy that I have found the most helpful of all is when I meet somebody, I'll ask them their name, and then when they give me their name, I will have to take a moment and mentally picture somebody who shares that name. Hopefully it's a cartoon character, a funny movie character, somebody that I know well who is a character. What you want to do is associate that person with some other person whose name you know very well, and that hopefully strikes an emotional chord with you, such as humor. Because, for example, I met a woman recently whose name was Patty. And so immediately when I met her, I, in my brain, visualized Peppermint Patty, you know, from the Peanuts, standing beside her and kind of holding her shoulders. And the reason you want to do that, somebody taught me that, is when you create that visual image of the person whose name you remember doing something with that person. It could be slapping them in the face, it could be throwing a football at them, it could be holding their hand, it could be standing beside them and stroking their hair. But when you know somebody who has the same name as someone who you just met, picture that person doing something with the person that you just met. Again, something physical where they're touching, where they're together. And what that does is creates a very strong picture in your brain, because you're using somebody that you already know, that you're already familiar with. Again, it can be real or it can be an imaginary character. It could be somebody that you saw in a movie, on a cartoon, but someone who you're already familiar with. If you can connect them with that person that you just met visually and doing something, and especially if you can connect it with humor, the next time you see that person, it's much, much easier for your brain to remember not their name, but the character that you associated with them, doing something with them. And that, in turn, helps you remember their name. The other thing that helps you remember people's names is as you're doing this, because really, unless you have some type of mental hook, you will be doomed. You cannot remember everybody's name. It's impossible. If you go to any of those memory seminars, or if you read a book on improving your memory, they all have that common link. They all tell you, don't just try and repeat their name in your head, or Say to yourself, Midge, 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 Midge. Don't try to rely on your memory to help you remember things. Instead, you have to play games in your head. You have to have hooks. You have to have creative stories to help you remember things. They all have that in common. And so while you're creating that mental hook to help you remember that person's name, repeat their name out loud at least 3 times when you first meet them. For example, when I met Patty, I said, "Hi, I'm Dan O'Connor, what's your name?" And remember that when you meet somebody, that's the verbal pattern you want to use. Not simply, "Hi, what's your name?" You want to say, "Hi, I'm so-and-so, what's your name?" as you extend your hand to shake their hand. And when I said, "Hi, I'm Dan O'Connor, what's your name?" and she said, "Hi, my name's Patty," I shook Patty's hand and I said, "Hi, Patty, nice to meet you. Tell me, Patty, yada, yada, yada." And then after a couple of minutes, if you're going to move along, if you're going to meet somebody else, especially in a big social gathering, let's say you're at a networking event, you say, "Hi, Peter, it's nice to meet you. Tell me, Peter, yada, yada, yada." And then in a few minutes, when you're about to move along, say, "Well, Peter, it was really nice to meet you. I hope to see you again soon," or however you close, and then leave. You have used their name 3 times, and each time you use it, again, remember that mental picture that you drew in your head. And if you do that, you will be able to remember an entire room full of people's names. It is amazing how much that one trick has helped me. I can have a workshop where there might be 150 people in that workshop, and they will say to me at the end, "If you see me on the street, will you remember my name?" And I'll say, "Of course I will, Patty. Of course I will, Mary. Of course I will, Joe." Because once you have really solidified a picture in your brain, such as the one we described, a character doing something with that person, you won't ever forget it. And if you do that one thing, you can avoid the uncomfortable, "Hi, I don't know if you remember meeting me, but I'm Dan O'Connor. What's your name again?" And people will be in awe of your ability to remember everybody's name. And now I'd like to move along to our danger and power phrases for work and home.
Stop using danger phrases. We're gonna give you the power.
And the first phrase that I'd like to give you this week is simply a power phrase. There is no danger phrase to go along with this one. The power phrase is, you should be proud of yourself. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because at home and at work, many times we will say to people, "I am really proud of you." And by the way, don't be afraid to say that at work. Many of us feel uncomfortable saying things such as, "I'm proud of you" at work, especially if you are the driver type or the analytical type that we discussed last week. But don't be afraid to say that. People love to hear the phrase, "I'm proud of you." However, what we need to remind other people of sometimes is that they should be proud of themselves as well. So if you are going to say, for example, at home to one of your children, "You got all A's on your report card? I am so proud of you." Add, "And you know what, sweetheart? You should be really proud of yourself." Because when you tell a child, "You should be proud of yourself," watch how their physical posture normally changes, and their chest will go up and their chin will go up, because when you tell somebody, "You should be proud of yourself," that triggers something in most people that actually gives us permission to be proud of ourselves. And we think, "Yeah, I can be proud of myself. It's not simply that other people are proud of me, I'm proud of myself." Because it is one thing to have someone proud of you, but it is an entirely different thing to be proud of yourself. So encourage people to be proud of themselves. And if at work you have trouble saying to people that you are proud of them, I mean, that some people, especially, for example, the drivers, find it nearly impossible to say to somebody, "I'm very proud of you." So if that's something that you struggle with, it's easier to say sometimes, "Wow, you did a great job. You should be proud of yourself." So that is a power phrase for the week. You should be proud of yourself. And your danger phrase for home this week is, it's okay when someone is apologizing to you. Let's talk about that for a moment. People apologize to us, and frequently what we will do is say to that person, "It's okay," or "Don't worry about it." Let's scratch that from our verbal repertoire at home and at work. Instead, when somebody says, "I apologize," normally what they will say is, "I'm sorry," or "I'm really sorry." What we want to say is, "I forgive you." So say that out loud, because I bet you're not used to saying it unless you've practiced, right? "I forgive you" is not a common verbal pattern for most people. So say that out loud. "I forgive you." Now we can couple that with other phrases, but we don't want to send a message that it's okay for somebody to mistreat us. And so when somebody apologizes for his or her actions, when they have mistreated us, and we say to them something like, it's okay, or don't worry about it, that is sending a message not just to them, but to us, that it's all right when it's not all right. What we mean to say is, I forgive you. And it's okay to say something such as, well, you did hurt my feelings. However, I forgive you. We all make mistakes, and I think it's time to put a period and move along from that. So thank you for apologizing. It's okay to say that, but don't say it's okay. Say something along the lines of, we can move forward, things like this happen, we all make mistakes, but the phrase that we want to be using when somebody asks us for forgiveness is, I forgive you. And that sends a message that, yes, this is over. However, I'm not going to diminish my own worth by saying that it's okay to mistreat me. So it's okay in response to an apology, danger phrase. Instead, I forgive you is the power phrase. And now I'd like to move along to our danger phrases and power phrases for work. Last week we talked a lot about style stepping. We talked about the 4 different personality types. And we're going to be transitioning into persuasion techniques in these lessons. And I'd like to start out by addressing the verbal pattern, so that it, so it will, so it can. These are danger phrases that I'd like you to focus on this week for this reason. Of course, it's not generally a bad idea to use the phrase so that it, or so it can, or so it will. These are common verbal patterns. However, if our intention is to be persuasive, if we are saying something to somebody to try to get them to go along with our idea, our product, our service, if we are trying to get them to buy whatever it is that we're selling, whether it's an actual service product or simply an idea or a proposal, we want to use benefit language. And benefit language is not about it, so that it, so it can, so it will. Benefit language is about the person to whom you are speaking. So you want to use phrases such as, so you can, so you will. So instead of, for example, saying, you should switch our office computers from PCs to Mac, the benefit isn't because they don't get viruses, because they run more efficiently. The benefit is so that you won't have to deal with viruses, so that you will save time, which translates into saving money. Benefit statements are about the person, and those are always going to include the word you. So remember, when you are trying to be persuasive and tell somebody, I think we should do XYZ so that, it's not so that it's so that you, so you will, so you can. And if you want to make it very easy to deliver properly phrased benefit statements, you can very frequently use the lead-in line, so you can, or so that you. And now I'd like to talk about our difficult person of the week.
Wait, there's more. The last thing I wanted to mention today as a bonus was, since we're talking about style stepping and personality types, many people have struggled with the question, tell me a little bit about your weaknesses. Whether it's in a job interview or an employee review, or if you're talking to your boss or whatever it may be, many times when we are asked, tell me about your weaknesses, it's difficult to respond to that question because we don't really want to reveal our true weaknesses or especially focus on them. So here's how you answer that question. What you want to do is start out talking about your strengths. For example, I'm a driver, so I would say, well, my natural strengths, being a driver personality type, are going to be things such as setting goals and achieving them, being able to start projects quickly. But of course, because I'm a driver, I'm going to have to be sensitive to things that actually come naturally to the amiable type, such as being sensitive to other people's feelings and not being too aggressive when working with others. So those are things that I have to be sensitive to because of my natural strengths, which again are things such as setting goals and achieving them and being able to start projects quickly. So what you want to do is talk about your strengths and then talk about your opposite personality type strengths as if those were your weaknesses, because they're going to be really. Talk about how you need to be sensitive to those and then circle back to your strengths at the end. That is how you answer that question, and you're weaving in personality types. So you're showing the person not only can you answer the question confidently, but you're aware of personality types and how to work with not only yours but others. That's your bonus for the week.
And our difficult person of the week is the time sucker.
Oh no, I hear Hi, do you have a minute?
Ah!
This lesson is continued in the next episode, so this is Dan O'Connor. Make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you on the inside. These free effective communication skills training course videos brought to you by communication expert keynote speaker Dan O'Connor.